Before we get started on this video, some brief background. Oath was a game that I reviewed so hard that I managed to give myself the coronavirus. That's what my doctor told me, at least. Turns out it's pretty hard to do most of your job when you need to devote 90% of your time to lying down, feeling sorry for yourself, and watching restoration videos on YouTube, and combined with the fact that most games just can't be played horizontally. But you know what game can be played horizontally? You know what game was with me in my time of need? That's right. It's the big box of trains. This bad boy is Railroad Inc. Deluxe Edition, and during my isolation and illness period, I played 28 games of Railroad Inc., and thus have become a world-leading expert. So, to pull some value from that experience, to make all those games worth something, this is a review of all 28 individual expansions in this box. Can you buy this stuff? No, you sort of can, but it's scarce. So why am I doing this? I don't know. For those that aren't in the know, Railroad Inc. is a relaxing roll and write game about drawing little train lines on top of a nice grid. We've got a review of it over here if you don't know what it is, but if you clicked on this video, you want to get to the good stuff. You want me to tell you about the wild expansions added into the Railroad Inc. formula. You want me to tell you if the arcade expansion is better or worse than the engineer expansion. It's way worse. So without further ado, I will waste no more time than I have already. This is a review of all 28 Railroad Inc. expansions.
Rivers.
We're starting with the oldest and faithfulest of the bunch, Deep Blue and its two expansions, Rivers and Lakes. Rivers are essentially a third kind of route to draw on your board. A little bit irritating, and they kind of get everywhere, but they are the definition of a good Railroad Inc. expansion. A little bit head-scratching to manage, but a nice new thing to draw on your board. And you know what's great about the rivers is that you can instantly tell that they're rivers. They work exactly as you expect them to, with minimal friction. These things perfectly embody rule number 1 of good Railroad Inc. expansion content. Simplicity is key. B tier. It's a good expansion.
Lakes.
Lakes are even better. They let you draw one big central puddle that all your routes connect into, making a big interconnected wet grid. And in the spaces in between, you can draw waves, but also little boats, or maybe a lighthouse if you fancy. They're real nice to draw, and they add to the chill vibes of any given game of Railroad Inc. And they're real nice on the eyes to boot. A tier, a lovely expansion. And those are both expansions in the Deep Blue edition, and as such, this edition encompasses the A and B tiers like so.
Meteors.
Meteors are the first expansion of Blazing Red edition, and at first blush, they seem pretty cool. You're adding meteors that come down and crash into your board, creating craters and disrupting your plans. What's not to love?
Everything.
This is a highly opinionated list, and meteors annoy me quite a lot. Rubbing out bits of your lovely track feels bad, and having danglies leading into craters to score points is not aesthetic. What right do they have coming down from space and ruining my day? D tier. I mean, most people would probably give them B tier, but this is my list, and I'm gonna give them D tier.
Hot lava.
The lava expansion in Blazing Red edition wants to ask you one simple question. Do you want the lake expansion, but fiddlier and worse? No? Tough. You bought Blazing Red edition, and now you're paying the price. D tier. And this one embodies the second key rule of Railroad Inc. expansions. No bad expansions. That's Blazing Red edition, and overall, this bad boy should go in the D tier, but the sum of both expansions being D tier obviously means it goes off the bottom of the list and into hot hell where it belongs. Hell tier.
Challenge Edition.
Ah, a new challenger approaches. Railroad Inc. Challenge. Shining Yellow and Lush Green are both Challenge Edition boxes of Railroad Inc., which add a bunch of new things to the base game formula, namely a tweaked set of core dice, including the dreaded baseball dice, and some small features on the board. Villages that get you points if you put stations on them, universities that give you access to additional special routes, and factories that let you double your dice. Challenge Edition also adds these goal cards to the game, which add an extra bit of player interaction as players scrabble to complete them before anyone else. Obviously, I don't really care about the goal cards or the player interaction because I mostly play this game alone. These new additions to the formula make Railroad Inc. Challenge a meatier experience than base game Railroad Inc., and as such, they add a new modifier to the tier list. Better with Challenge. And with that in mind, let's review the 2 expansions contained within Railroad Inc. Shining Yellow Edition. Oh, there's so many expansions.
Cactus.
The Cactus expansion is a weak expansion. Or at least it was in my one game of it, where I rolled nothing but cacti and oases and just got points. To explain, the Cactus expansion has you planting cacti on one die face that are worth points, but if you roll a sun, you burn them all away, but not if you protect them with these oases that you can put next to the cacti to keep them alive. You know, I can sort of imagine this being a fun expansion if the die go your way, and in my game, they just didn't. So I'm putting this one in the theoretical B tier.
Canyons.
Canyons are the other expansion in Shining Yellow Edition, and I literally forgot everything about the Canyons expansion, so it and Shining Yellow Edition go in the secret ? Tier.
Trails.
Mwah! Delectable! Delicious! Lush Green is home to the Trails expansion, which is maybe my favourite single core box Railroad Inc. expansion. Essentially, it adds these single, thin paths to some routes that you can use to connect your stations together with little walking trails. What a lovely little spatial challenge where you need to plot out where you're putting your little trails between each different station and planning it all out like a real map. It's tactically and visually pleasing. S tier. S tier expansion sublime.
Forest.
Also in Lush Green Edition is the Forest expansion, which is a little basic, but boy does it toast my bread. You get dice with trees on them, and the more trees you put in a big forest, the better. A tier. It's simple to understand, but also an absolute blessing of an expansion if you want something that's simple to implement, easygoing, and just plain fun. And it also reminds me of not only Rule 1, simplicity is key, but also Rule 3, it's good when you know the thing in real life. And that's Lush Green Edition, which obviously, because both of its expansions are delightful, gets the pleasure of being located in the opposite of Hell tier. Very good tier. And so we are at the end of our core box Railroad Inc. journey. Wasn't that fun? Dry? Lazy? Phoned in? Yes, to some of the above. But that's not all. Railroad Inc. Deluxe Edition also comes with a phenomenal amount of these admittedly very poorly packaged expansion dice and a bunch of other optional bits and pieces. Why not review those as well? I mean, we've got to meet our expansion quota or Quinns will be angry.
Under the ground.
What's better than one game of Railroad Inc? That's right, one game of Railroad Inc is the right amount of Railroad Inc. But what if that one game was 2 games in one? Take that, psychology. The Underground expansion for Railroad Inc adds a second board that you'll draw underground routes on, creating a tube system for trains and a tube system for farts. If you connect your underground stations with your above ground stations, then you get bonus points. But if you put your above ground stations on top of the pipes, you get breakages. Nightmare. The Underground expansion is one that's cool. Whoa. The Underground expansion is one that is cool in concept, but ultimately I'm not that much of a fan. The joy of Railroad Inc. is located secretly in its brevity, and this expansion effectively doubles the length of the game, which is fine if there's meat on those bones, but these bones are effectively meatless. Meatless. I'm sorry, Underground, you're going in the C tier. The Electricity expansion comes with 2 modules. Either you can make ultra-long highways peppered with streetlights, or you can manage a power grid across your board. The streetlights are pretty neat. You pop them down with your routes, and then whenever you use a special route, you get to power them up for bonus points. Line them up and strike them down. It's very satisfying, and both dice have more roads on them, which means your game becomes Motorway Inc. This is one of the additional expansions that embodies the simplicity is key rule. B tier expansion. B tier? But Forests wasn't that spicy and it got A tier. Correct. All these smaller box expansions have a new rule applied to them, the disappointingly expensive modifier. Because you have to buy these in addition to the core boxes, they're working uphill. It's an uphill struggle. That's what I was looking for. They've got to work harder to impress me, King of Railroading. I think it's fine to call myself that. And speaking of working harder to impress me, let's talk about the second expansion in the electricity expansion, the Power Grid expansion.
Power grids.
Here you're connecting a central accumulator space to as many exits as possible and charging your routes with power distributed from that accumulator, snaking a route of power across your board. At the end of the game, you get a multiplier, how charged your accumulator is, multiplied by the number of exits connected by electrified spaces. The winner gets a copy of Power Grid delivered to their home address. I like this one. It's tricksy and it's fun, and you're kind of playing two games at once in your copy of Railroading. It's a nice game, and it's a nice game. A tier expansion. Power Grid, the actual board game, can go in hell tier though. And that's not a joke. Oh my goodness, there's so many expansions.
Airline.
Airline dice are the first module in the Sky expansion, and they add, effectively, rivers in the sky. You got 2 dice, and they've both got airlines on them, and making a long route that snakes across your board and ends in those airport spaces will get you a bunch of points. This one was fine. It was perfectly inoffensive, which surely means it should be a B tier. This is unfortunately not the case because of the modifiers. This bad boy's getting hit with the disappointingly expensive modifier that drags it down to a C tier, and a new rule, the I wanted this box to be cooler rule. Airlines sound great. I kind of wanted this to be a bit like a better version of the Underground expansion, where they sit on another layer on top of your board, but unfortunately, they're just another route that you've already got in Deep Blue Edition. Basically, this one just has river stations. D tier. D tier.
The weather.
The weather expansion makes up for the airline disappointment. You get 2 extra dice that'll apply weather effects to 2 pieces you draw that round. Big areas of weather will score you points, but if 2 different weather areas touch, you get nothing. Brutal, but a perfect addition to the Railroad Inc. formula, one that is unobtrusive, joyous, and simple. In fact, it abides perfectly by Rule 1, Subclause A. Simplicity is key, as long as it's not boring. This is just a good little box. A tier.
Engineer.
Do you enjoy Railroading, but get frustrated that your success is at the whims of some random die rolls and that your performance is somewhat arbitrary? That often whole games can come down to the roll of a dice? Do these things make you question why you're playing Railroading on your own at all? Then say hello to the 4-module Engineer expansion, which gives you 4 cool options in a little box of joy to renovate, change, and replace your existing transport hellscape. Renovation lets you alter routes, adding new bends and tunnels. The special die gives you a bunch of options for bigger, better routes and fancier interchanges. And the construction die lets you move stuff around and remove things from your board for planning perfection. And the separation dice is a literal hellscape. Look at this thing. It was designed by a maniac. I hate it and I love it. The Engineer expansion kind of looks a bit like a dull expansion, but it does let you make some truly bonkers routes. It's that perfect, subtle expansion magic that adds a little twist to the existing game, sweet, but not too sweet. It fits perfectly into Rule 1 Subclause B, or if it's just boring enough. And making it even better is the fact that it's super versatile, because whereas other expansions have to be used alone, the Engineer expansion is compatible with any other expansions. S tier! Let's do it! S tier! Except for the last Hellscape dice. That goes into the Hell tier. By design. Okay, so we're some time into this review. It is baking hot outside, and we've still got 12 more dice to review. So it's time for the nuclear option. It's the lightning round, baby! We're going to review all of the arcade, Eldritch, and future expansions, speed style. Pluckman! Play Pac-Man on your Railroading board. Put ghosts and fruit and Pluckman on your exits to score points. It's fine! B tier! Tetromino die. Do you want to play Tetris and also Railroading? Bad luck, because this feels like neither. It goes into the new boring zone. Rainbow die. What is this? It's weird and I don't like it. It feels like the most half-baked of all the expansions, and that is saying something. boring tier, but crossing the gap into hell tier just because I feel like it. Galactic Invaders adds player interaction into Railroad Inc. You draw aliens on your friends' boards and hope that they blow up parts of their meticulously laid track. This one is nifty and irritating, a bit of a gimmick expansion, but reasonably fun and silly. B tier. That's the arcade expansion done, and now it's time to get Eldritch. The Eldritch expansion adds all kinds of spooky scaries to your games of Railroad Inc. I need to be so careful pointing at these things because this is a horrible mess. The ritual die adds new exits round the edges of your board, which allow new point scoring opportunities if you link them up with these little rituals that you also get to draw on the board. These are pretty nifty. B tier. The portal die is just fine. C tier. The tentacle die basically adds speedy rivers that you make loads of. Roll a tentacle and draw that much of it on your board all in one go. The tentacle die really just is speedy, strange rivers, but I really don't like the theming of it being tentacles. I would be so much happier with this expansion if it was just rivers revised or something boring like that. And the Eldritch expansion introduces a new rule. Anything in the Eldritch expansion immediately gets docked 1 tier, because I'm sick to the teeth of anything Lovecraft. Investigation die. This stuff is pure bananas, and therefore gains the banana bonus. This expansion has you putting an investigator at an exit at the start of the game and drawing clues onto the board for him to find, spending movement points to get him to snuffle up the clues just like a regular pluck man. And in a lovely thematic touch, you can use your own built stations to move him faster along the routes. S tier expansion, purely because it's just nuts. The first module in the future expansion is the alien die, and I'd rather use the alien die in the arcade expansion than the alien die in the future expansion. This game has too many expansions. The alien farmer die in the future expansion adds cows and UFOs to abduct them, and it's alright. Totally and utterly forgettable expansion. C tier. Super connectors are the second die in the future expansion, and they add a new kind of route that's a universal connector. Fine and totally forgettable. Also C tier. Lastly, in the future expansion, we have the City Builder dice, and these two are rememberable. The City Builder dice give you various ways of earning income by building in really annoying, inefficient ways, and you can then spend that income on extra bonus points at the end of the game, these buildings that act as stoppers for the ends of your routes. Lovely little expansion. A tier. And that is all of the Railroad Inc. Deluxe Edition mini boxed expansions. We did it! We got to the end! But that's not all! Contained within the Deluxe Edition box, there are also a couple of other bonus bits and bobs that I would be remiss not to mention. First off, these giant boards are an absolute joy. They do exactly what they say on the tin. They're just a bigger Railroad Inc. board, and you can go and download them off the Horrible Guild website, where you could laminate a copy and have one for free. Not only do these make a standard game of Railroad Inc. even bigger and better, they also give you the option of playing with multiple expansions at once, which means you can fill your boots with all kinds of weird and wonderful combinations. And on the other side, the Epic board goes even further with this idea, having little pocketed towns that you need to connect up in the middle of the map. What a nifty, lovely little big thing. There's also a solo board available, and it's really nifty, having you fill in spaces that let you re-roll your dice for increased planning opportunities. I didn't really use this one much though, because for the interests of testing these expansions, I presumed you didn't have it available, because whereas the giant board is available online, I don't think that the solo board is. So there's that. And lastly, you've got these wonderful starting city layout cards. These change the starting layouts for your maps in a way that reminds me of the utterly delicious mobile and PC game Mini Metro. I legitimately can't wait to play through every single one of these double-sided beauties in a little mini campaign, a Railroad Inc. campaign where do I put these? And that's it! We're done! I've reviewed all of the Railroad Inc. expansions. What a joy. Before I end this video though, a brief aside. Railroad Inc. is a lovely game, and the designers have put work into making it infinitely, ridiculously expandable, and even though I didn't enjoy my time with every single one of these individual weird dice, I still played the game 28 times, and I had a good time doing it every single time. So, Cheers. I've got water somewhere. Cheers, Mr. Railroad Inc., for making a good game about trains. It's so warm. And that's it for this week's episode of the Shut Up and Sit Down video adventure series. We'll be back next week with a video that's less warm and less rushed. Bye!